Okay, I'm just seeing that the time is 6:33, and I think that just to honor everybody's commitment that we should begin. The very first person that I would like to invite to speak is Senator Denise Ricciardi of New Hampshire. Senator Ricciardi represents District 9 in New Hampshire State Legislature, where she serves on the Education Committee, Transportation Committee, and Committee on the Executive Departments and Administration. And she has prepared some open comments that she'd like to begin our evening, and then she has other senator commitments to get off to tonight. So thank you so much, Senator Ricciardi, for being here.
Thank you. So for the record, my name is Denise Ricciardi. I have been sitting on the town council in Bedford for the last 3 years, and I am in my second year as a state senator for the state of New Hampshire. And just to let you know, that was not something that I thought I was going to be doing. I want to tell you a little bit about my journey. Several years ago in the town of Bedford, where I live, they were going to propose a cell phone tower in my backyard and the backyard of our elementary school. I thought, that's not very attractive, but is it safe? I wonder if it's dangerous. That's how my journey truly began. It was a several-year battle. I was representing myself in federal court as an advocate for the people in my town. I have gone to Washington over this issue, and I've educated myself. That's really why I'm here this evening. As I was investigating the cell tower radiation issue, I discovered that while information is presented by companies that make it seem like cell phone tower radiation is safe, in fact, there are no safety assurances when it comes to this radiation. While wireless companies put forward federal agency statements as supporting their stance, a deeper look truly reveals that these agencies have not looked at all of the science, nor have they conducted the safety as it's assured. Furthermore, and most importantly, the federal agencies that the public assumes are ensuring our health and safety are in fact not ensuring that we are safe. This is no US health and safety agency. This is studying cell tower radiation and reviewing all the research. I am not against technology. We cannot go backwards. We look at the pandemic and how many people had to work from home, continue to work from home, and children with their schoolwork. I want technology, but what I want is it to be safe, sustainable, and responsible technology. The FCC radiation limits do not ensure safety. They are 25-year-old limits that were set in 1996. They say the only way the radiation can harm us is if it creates heat. Non-thermal radiation can cause harm. Plenty of peer-reviewed scientific studies show that damage can be done at non-thermal levels. The FCC and the industry promote reports from the FDA, making it seem like the FDA believes cell tower radiation to be safe. This is inaccurate. First of all, the FDA has never done a formal review of all the independent science. Secondly, the FDA has no authority when it comes to cell towers, cell tower radiation. In fact, the FDA has only put out a now 8-dated literature review only on the phones, not on anything else. If you actually take the time to read this report, you will see that it is not about the towers that create the nonstop radiation exposures day and night, but only about cell phones used intermittently for a few minutes of testing. The Pittsburgh Law Review published an article stating, I quote, "The FCC and the FDA have failed in their obligation to prescribe safe RFR guidelines produced for wireless communications devices to protect the public health and safety. Such health organizations have filed a petition with the FDA and the Human Health Services to declare that cell phone tower radiation an imminent hazard. In the absence of strong protections of the federal level, those of us in state government must take the lead and join together with other courageous people who are acknowledging the public health crisis created by unsafe siting and those who are working for solutions at the municipal level, just like the Pittsfield Board of Health. Through legislative passage of proper setbacks and safer siting, we will be able to protect people from being sickened in their homes due to cell tower radiation. I just also want to add to this that it's interesting how I want to use an example of the tobacco industry. They literally knew for 4 decades that it was harming people, but nothing was really done about it. Why? Because money seems to be a very big driver in things. And I don't know when we're going to get to a point in our lives where money can't be the driver, but caring about human health, our quality of life and living, and the environment. That's what I think really needs to happen here. We need to pay attention and we need to advocate. The Telecommunications Commission, the FCC, they are very big, but there is power in people. That's really what I want to articulate to you, that you have to have faith over fear. And again, I never thought I would be in politics. I didn't really like politics, but this journey has brought me to this point, and I think that we all have to remember that and keep working really hard for what we believe in. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you this evening.
Senator Ricciardi, thank you so much for being here. It means the world to us. I know you have other commitments, but it just felt so important to me to have a legislator on our call this evening, because I think when people think about this issue, they think that it's isolated, that it's Pittsfield, that we're the only ones, and that could not be further from the truth. When we see that there are safe technology bills in the House and in the Senate in so many states, and that we have safe technology groups all over America and all over the world wanting safe cell tower placement, this is so important. And Senator Ricciardi, I met her in New Hampshire when we were testifying she was a co-sponsor of Bill HB 1644, which would establish those cell tower setbacks 1,640 feet away from residential areas, and also have a registry of wireless harm, so that there would be accurate reporting on how many people were actually harmed from this kind of infrastructure. Senator Ricciardi said, I was just a housewife and a mom who got involved in this issue. And she has been so inspiring to me, because her leadership on the issue led Governor Chris Sununu to appoint her to that New Hampshire commission to study the environmental and health effects of the evolving wireless technology. And Dr. Paul Peru, who will be speaking shortly, Dr. Kent Chamberlain, were also on that commission, so we'll hear more from them tonight. So thank you so much, Senator Ricciardi. I'd like to give my opening remarks quickly. I'll try and be brief, and then we'll move on to our presenters. My name is Courtney Gilardi, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for being here tonight. It's been 573 days since we've been sick or displaced from our homes because of the Verizon Farley White 877 South Street cell tower. And in that time, we have worked tirelessly to learn about the issues and provide the city of Pittsfield, the health department, and the Board of Health with world-renowned subject matter experts, many of who are here tonight. As you know, that we learned 17 plus people were experiencing symptoms that they never had before when the tower started transmitting, many of which improved or went away completely when we left our homes and returned when we went back. Electrosensitivity, electro hypersensitivity, also called EHS or microwave illness, has forced some in our neighborhood to sell in order to get away from the cell tower radiation and their effects. Others have spent their retirement money to sleep in hotels, and when that ran out, they slept in tents or in their cars. People like us, we were forced to find accommodation elsewhere. We just want to go home. I mean, that's our whole goal, is we just want to go home and not feel sick in our own beds. Those who remain in Shacktown not only experience the physical suffering caused by the radiation, but there's also an emotional distress created when one no longer feels safe in one's own home. And our struggle has been compounded by those who deny the existence of EHS, which is a recognized disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or feel like we have anecdotal, unproven, or motivated claims. Our personal physician and medical experts who have been presenting to Pittsfield and aiding in the 18-month-long investigation into the health effects are here to share otherwise. We are so grateful to those who have the political will required to address this public health crisis, and to those who have become educated about the substantial body of peer-reviewed science, which will be discussed here tonight, which overwhelmingly proves the biological hazard of microwave radiation at these non-thermal levels. And we are here tonight to speak to the scientific evidence, but beyond that, we know that we personally are the evidence. For those who have been dismissive of our devastated lives and state that the adverse health effects would be observable elsewhere, where we tell you that they are. When we told our story, it resonated not because it was unique, but because people all over the country and the world reached out with stories of their own, of being harmed by wireless radiation. And we've met families with children like ours harmed by wireless facilities. And we've learned that in every case, local municipalities feel helpless to do anything about it, when the reality is that everyone is responsible for the health and safety of those in a community on every level of government. No one sells their home or flees their home because they don't like the sight of something. The truth is that our lives in our neighborhood has been destroyed because of the radiation from the cell tower sited way too close to where people live. And on February 2nd, 2022, the Pittsfield Board of Health recognized the ongoing damage being done to our health. They took this entire team of people in consultation, writing reports, giving presentations, and voted to act in our defense in a unanimous decision to issue the cease and desist order to Verizon, requiring them to turn off the tower. And we are grateful that at the recent executive session of the Board of Health, board members held firm to their decision, despite what we can imagine being industry disinformation, malinformation, misinformation, and confusion, which seems to have spread in an attempt to stop this cease and desist before it's even issued, or sow doubt that somehow it would risk the financial health of the entire city. Our answer tonight is before you. A panel of experts have been assembled to answer questions that have been raised, including sharing the position of the World Health Organization, EPA, National Toxicology Program. Everyone here tonight are volunteers. For well over a year, many have offered free advice and counsel to the Pittsfield Health Department, the Board of Health, and the entire administration. They are each renowned and respected for being among the best minds and the greatest authorities in each of their particular specialties. And we thank each and every one of them for attending. We thank you for attending. It is our deepest hope that tonight's presentation will open the path to the Pittsfield Board of Health issuing the cease and desist order at its next meeting, which is 2 nights from now on Wednesday, March 2nd. Now, our first presenter, without further ado, is Dr. Paul Peru. Dr. Paul Héroux is a scientist and professor with a combined 45 years of experience in physics, engineering, and public health. He is the Occupational Health Program Director and an associate professor at McGill's University Faculty of Medicine. He is a medical scientist in the Department of Surgery of the McGill University Health Center. Dr. Héroux's experience is in toxicology and the health effects of electromagnetism. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Courtney. I am now going to share my screen. Do you see it? This one, I guess. Yes, this one here.
Yep, got it.
Okay. So my dark hair in this first slide sort of belies my age. So I would like to give you the benefit of my age to go through a rather quick overview of how we messed up these safety limits and why we are in this situation. And the first item that is very important is that the wireless is of great importance to the military. This is 1918, but although at that time wireless was enormously precious, it is still precious today. In fact, the military today simply dream of more telecommunications, and wireless communication at maximum intensity is nowhere more valuable than in a theater of war. But the military, by their nature of their business, are inclined to accept risks. Parachuting into enemy territory is acceptable in times of war, but most of us would not parachute to work every morning. So what this created as pressure is that the first committees that were set up to evaluate the safety of electromagnetic radiation were heavily, I would say, weighed towards the armed forces, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army. So essentially, in this first committee that had enormous influence, because it set, so to speak, a reference point, you had a large number of representatives from the armed forces, one person from public health, one person from Treasury, one from General Dynamics, who makes warplanes, one from the Space Administration, and one from the Petroleum Institute. And this, I would say, explains a lot of things. And after this initial setting up of safety philosophy, I would say, the baton was passed essentially from the military to industry. And industry is filled of very ingenious people. And what these people saw, I'm going to show you now, they saw that there was an enormous opportunity to put this wireless technique into the hands of people, and that this would be enormously valuable, I would say, financially. So essentially what the military delivered was a thermal limit that accommodated their, I would say, their views on being able to live within large, high levels of electromagnetic radiation. So the way industry went then is that, fascinated by the commercial possibilities, it then set out to establish a standard. And this is the faceplate of a standard that has become very, very important. And this standard is in fact a standard that has like 235 pages long and is a little bit technical if you're not familiar. I'm showing you an example page here. And when I was a consultant years ago to telecommunications companies in the world, I was often told by engineers that this standard was a consultant's dream, because if you're not familiar with heat transfer, you have a bit of a hard time interpreting this. So I did, make some amount of money interpreting this for industry. And in fact, the IEEE openly advertised that if you don't understand the standard, and if you really studied it, well, maybe we can help you out and explain it further. But what this did is that very few people understood the small details of such a complicated and long document. In other words, electrical engineers understand electromagnetism well, but mostly people do not. And a lot of people were indeed intimidated. So what industry then did is that it took the gift of the thermal limit, which set limits extremely high from the military, and devised a standard entirely based on heat. And unfortunately, this standard depended on an experiment that lasted a single hour. Well, unfortunately, short-term heat, like 1 hour, cannot represent long-term health. So over 1 hour, you will miss about 85% of the health problems that are limit-setting toxicities. So by its design, this type of philosophy was set up to fail. Now, the IEEE is the world's largest professional association. And so what this meant is that in any country of the world where standards were considered for electromagnetic radiation exposure, the IEEE was enormously influential because engineers were really the ones who understood the question very well and had a vested interest in establishing the standards. And another factor that I think is very, very important in creating this worldwide problem is that it was a shortcut. The IEEE did a fair amount of work in creating a document that explained the issue of heat. For any national organization to start over from scratch and to truly take into account biological and medical expertise would have been relatively difficult. So the issue of shortcut is very, very important. It was convenient. The industry created documents that were technical, looked convincing, and so on. So this created the situation in which these standards that are thermally based became entirely accepted very, very easily throughout the world. But as years passed, some things happened. And one of the things that happened is that people felt sick from the radiation. And now we are living in a world where the excesses of radiation are palpable, at least in a certain percentage of the population. And so we now have studies, both in the United States on the left and in Australia, where different populations that are very far removed from one another experience real health impacts from this radiation way below the thermal limits that were favored by the military. So over time and way after the IEEE established its limits, other standards were brought around. So you have the European Academy for Environmental Medicine, the Austrian Medical Association, the International Guidelines on Non-Ionizing Radiation, and biology. And we're comparing them in this slide to the FCC limits. Now, for power density, the FCC limit at 900 megahertz is 6 million microwatts per square meter. If you look at all of these numbers here that are discriminated according to circumstance, daytime, nighttime, if you're sensitive, whether you're in a very far above normal zone or within a normal zone, and so on, the levels are extremely, very, very, very clearly much lower than the FCC. So the ratio to the FCC level, which is one here for the FCC itself, are very, very large numbers. So this is extremely troubling because apparently people were seeing symptoms of intoxication by electromagnetic radiation at levels that were much lower. And I am graphing that here. And this summarizes the fact that the IEEE safety limit was essentially built on a 1 hour experiment on rats. And they determined that at this level of radiation, rats would stop working for food, for example. Now, they said, we will give you a 50-fold reduction because we're so nice. And this will be the standard that we would like to establish. FCC, it's easy to give a rebate in price when you start very, very high. And if you look at all of the other recommendations for health impacts that were derived from medical expertise, you see that there are many orders of magnitude. Each of these intervals represents a factor of 10. So you realize that the gap is very, very large. And we do have to explain why this gap is so large. And there is an explanation. If you look at the committees, I'm going to go through 3 of them. They have here on this biology committee a chemist, probably 2 electrical engineers, a physicist, an information technology person, a biologist, an environmentalist, and a building biologist. So this is more or less the composition that you would expect from a committee studying the health impacts of almost anything. Now, looking at the European standard, well, a lot of them were from environmental medicine, electrical engineering is represented, public health is there, and medicine, medical research is there. If we look lastly at the international guidelines on non-ionizing radiation, you have health educators, environmental safety, physician, a physicist, and oddly enough, a mother. Why do we have a mother here? Well, this is the mother of Jenny Fry. This is a teenager who suffered immensely at school because her teachers would not allow her to be removed from under a Wi-Fi unit. And meeting very little understanding at the age of 15, she committed suicide. Now, one of the things that the thermally based standard is entirely ignorant about is the fact that all radiation is not the same. And here I have a slide taken from the European standard that says that for daytime exposure, for radio broadcast FM, 10,000 microwatts per square meter are tolerable. But if you're talking about something like 3G or 900 megahertz frequencies, pulsed radiation, you have a ratio of 100 in the type of tolerance that humans have to this radiation. So what this means is that if you're only looking at heat, you will always consider that the contribution of cellular telephony is marginal compared to the overall heat burden of electromagnetic radiation. And of course, this is wrong. Essentially, I have a picture here of the monitoring of the heat emissions from a variety of smart meters. And of course, this instrument can measure lots of things, but generally in surveys that are conducted by industry, it measures heat. There's all sorts of radio frequencies radiation. Some are pulsed, some are not pulsed, some are continuous, some are at frequencies that are much higher than RF radiation that are entirely normal. And often in the reports of industry, they compare their pulsed radiation to radiation from the sun, which is at a totally different frequency, that is unpolarized, that is unpulsed, and so on. So we do have I would say, a slope to climb in going back to standards that will protect people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paul Héroux. Paul has been with us from the very beginning of all of this, and we are so grateful for you being a resource for our city and for our community. We really appreciate that explanation. Thank you. Our next presenter is Dr. Magda Havas. Dr. Magda Havas has presented to the Community Development Board here in Pittsfield during hearings back in November and December of 2020 about the value of cell tower setbacks away from homes and school, that 1,640 feet. Since the mid-1990s, Dr. Havas has taught about electromagnetic pollution, electromagnetic fields, and the health effects of electromagnetic radiation in several specialty courses at Trent University. And these are taught at a senior undergraduate level, critically examining the effects of non-ionizing radiation. Dr. Havas has helped draft Resolution 15 that was passed by the International Association of Firefighters, and she's given in excess of 360 presentations in more than 30 countries in more than 24 universities and colleges on her research. Many of these presentations are at medical and environmental conferences. She is also invited to talk to public interest groups in North America and in Europe, and has provided expert testimony on the health effects of electromagnetic pollution as they relate to these broadcast antennas. Thank you, Dr. Magda Havas, for being with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Courtney. I'm going to show some slides. Can people hear me okay? Yes. The question that we're asking in my presentation is, why should we be concerned about radio frequency radiation? According to the Americans for Responsible Technology, you can go to their website and you'll notice that there are a lot of studies linking adverse health effects to this exposure. Well, according to the Americans for Responsible Technology, there are 71 studies dealing with reproduction. They list 42 studies dealing with cancer and 35 studies dealing with electro hypersensitivity. Now, in science, we use 3 different types of evidence. We have epidemiological studies that are showing an association between an agent and an outcome. And that's been done a lot for cancers and for electro hypersensitivity. When we do in vivo studies with lab animals, these are studies with living organisms. They tell us about the cause effect. And when we do in vitro studies, which is in glassware, that's how we learn about the mechanisms. And when all 3 of these types of studies show the same bit of information, then it's time for us to be really concerned, because the science is verifying itself, basically. So I'm going to talk about electro hypersensitivity. And here we have a chart that was done, a study that was done in Spain. It shows you along the bottom axis here with the different colors, it shows you how far away people were from a cell tower. Now, some people were as close as 10 meters, which is about 30 feet. And these are the symptoms that they experienced. Fatigue was very high on the scale, headaches, difficulty concentrating, memory loss, that sort of thing. And if you go all the way out to the black, which is beyond 300 meters, then you can see that all of those symptoms have been diminished quite substantially. And these are the list of symptoms in order presented from this particular study. Now you'll notice that I've got some of these in red and some of these in black. The ones in red are things that we experience as we age. And so a term that I use for electro hypersensitivity is rapid aging syndrome, because it is causing aging of our cells. Now, we're not talking about aging on the outside, we're actually talking about aging on the inside. We have free radical damage, which is common in aging, but it's also common when we're exposed to environmental pollutants. And there's a huge amount of research showing oxidative stress, which affects every type of cell in our body. In 2019, I wrote this report saying that electromagnetic pollution is a neurotoxin. It's toxic to nerve cells. And if you look at the list of symptoms that I cover in this particular paper, a lot of them in the box here are things that we get as we get older. But if you look below this, you can see a lot of these symptoms are things that children are experiencing. And we know that things like ADHD, autism, cognitive difficulties, reading problems are all increasing among the younger generation. And if we look at the results from a paper by Bevington in 2019, what he estimated was that about 0.6% of the population is so severely affected by this radiation that they can't work. And my guess is that some of the people who have developed illnesses ever since the tower went in are probably in this category, or they're severely affected. And these are the numbers that we get for Pittsfield. So for a population of approximately 44,000, almost 300 can't work, 600 would be severely affected if they were exposed to the cell tower within a distance of about 300 to 500 meters. So people immediately around the tower would be affected. And if you look at Massachusetts, the numbers are obviously much higher. So we're dealing with something that affects the workforce, it affects health, it affects our finances, it affects our family life. So this is something that I think is extremely serious. And one of the things, when I give talks, sometimes someone in the audience will say, well, you know, if this were true, they would have told us. And I tell them, well, I'm one of the people who works in this field, and I'm telling you what the research is showing. But it's not just current scientists. So in 1971, there was a publication that I think Dr. Goldberg is going to show, and that stated that there were all sorts of biologically relevant illnesses that were attributed to radio frequency radiation. So we knew back in 1970s that this was harmful. In 2015, so much more recently, over 200 scientists from 42 countries signed an international appeal asking the World Health Organization and other bodies to really take a look at this issue very seriously. We know that cell phone manufacturers have a provision that it shouldn't be next to the head, it should be further away. And the further away a cell phone is, the less radiation that's absorbed by the body. And finally, insurance agencies are failing to cover radio frequency damage, illnesses from radio frequency radiation. And of all the groups globally that know how to do risk management assessments, it's the insurance industry, because they don't want to lose their money by insuring people who are ultimately going to become ill that they'll have to pay for. We have medical academies that are speaking out to protect children, and we have various governments that are preventing or removing Wi-Fi from schools. So they are telling us that we're not listening. And so my final slide is to say that what I see happening in the future, if steps are not taken now, like the steps that are requested in Pittsfield, we're going to have our anxiety-prone children taking care of their neurologically damaged parents. And this is not an overestimate of what's going on. And with that, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to present to you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Havas, for being such an amazing resource here for us in Pittsfield. We really appreciate your time tonight. Our next presenter will be Dr. Kent Chamberlain. And Dr. Kent Chamberlain, he is a recently retired professor who's probably working harder than ever now of the University of New Hampshire's Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. During 35 years in academia, he has performed research from more than 20 sponsors, including the National Science Foundation. He has received 2 Fulbright Awards, including the prestigious Fulbright Distinguished Chair, and served as an associate editor for the Institute for Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and continues to be active in performing and publishing in a range of research areas. Dr. Chamberlain received his PhD from Ohio University, specializing in computational electromagnetics, and his research has been devoted to modeling radio wave propaganda, including interfering radiation from computing devices and wave phenomena in the human body. So thank you, Dr. Kent Chamberlain, for being with us tonight and presenting multiple times to both Pittsfield and Lenox.
Thank you for that introduction, Courtney. I think that you can tell from that introduction that I'm not anti-technology, and obviously I'm not far from, I'm very much an advocate. The bad news, which you've heard from the previous speakers, is that there is harm associated with exposure to electromagnetic fields. That's the bad news. We love our phones, but the good news is there is a lot that we can do to protect ourselves against it so we still can enjoy the benefits. So that's going to take resolve on our part, and it's going to take some funding to make that all happen. So I was very much encouraged by the Board of Health's decision regarding the cease and desist order. The findings of the board are in line with the findings of the State Commission and the findings of the Unbiased Scientific Medical Organization. I should note that the reason that I'm talking to you is because I served on that New Hampshire Commission along with 2 of the other speakers, and we found a lot, and I've given videos that provide detail about the commission and its findings. And I don't have time for that right now, but I can say that we brought together experts in the field, and I'll talk just a little bit more about that in a moment. So I'm encouraged by the Board of Health decision regarding that cease and desist order. According to all that we've read, and according to the State Commission, the people of Pittsfield are being harmed by radiation, and so the actions taken by the board to protect them are appropriate and to be applauded. So while I was encouraged by the board's decision, I was really dismayed to read an unsigned opinion piece in the Berkshire Eagle, which described the board's decision as they put it, another troubling precedent. So that anonymous article completely ignored the large body of scientific evidence showing that cell tower radiation can cause the symptoms experienced by the Pittsfield residents. The most accurate description I can give about that article is that it was a hit job written by people unwilling to be identified. It should also be noted that the article parroted the talking points for the wireless industry, talking points that have long ago been disproven by science. So because of the many errors and omissions in that article, I submitted a letter to the editor of the Berkshire Eagle responding to their opinion piece. And what I find concerning is they never published my letter. So I double checked to make sure that I got their email address correct. So I'm sure they received it. So my expectation for journalism is that any unbiased news outlet will publish letters to the editor, even if that outlet disagrees with what is in those letters. I think you'll agree with me that any news outlet that will not publish a differing opinion from a reliable source, I'm calling myself a reliable source there, but it cannot be relied on to report in a fair and unbiased manner. So because the Berkshire Eagle chose not to publish my letter, I thought I would use this opportunity to present here. I should mention that my letter includes links to relevant information, but since I'm reading the letter, I can't provide those links to you now, although I understand that my letter will be made available to you along with the recording of this meeting. So my letter to the editor goes as follows. Dear Berkshire Eagle editor, I'm writing as a former member of the New Hampshire Commission that was tasked with exploring the environmental and health effects of evolving wireless and 5G technology. As some of your readers may know, this commission was formed through bipartisan legislation and was supported by the governor. The commission was comprised of unpaid and unbiased experts in fields relating to health and radiation, and were highly qualified to evaluate the issue in a fair and in-depth manner. The commission submitted its final report, and again, I have links to these, to the final report and the legislation. They released their final report in November 2020, with a key finding being that exposure to wireless radiation is harmful to the health of humans and the environment. It is because of the sharp contrast between the opinions expressed in your article and the factual conclusions reached by a panel of unbiased experts that I'm writing you now. I should note that I have weighed in on this issue several times before, including presentations to people in Pittsfield and a presentation to the Lennox Board of Health. A video of that presentation is linked here. That video provides an overview about the science behind wireless radiation, with that science coming from peer-reviewed journals and internationally recognized experts. The video also shows why statements about radiation from industry and some governmental agencies are not to be trusted. Please keep in mind that these are not the unfounded opinions of conspiracy theorists, but they are the well-documented conclusions of a formal state commission. The Board of Health's decision to consider a cease and desist order is a brave one, and it puts its members in an uncomfortable position. They weighed the facts in this situation, not opinions, and they came to the correct decision that the tower is harming nearby residents. I feel confident that if you were to review the proven science relating to wireless radiation, you too would come to a conclusion similar to the one reached by the board. Your Board of Health is doing its job by working to protect the citizens against a known toxin. Sometimes doing the right thing can be an uphill battle because of the moneyed interests that are unwilling to pay the costs associated with mitigating a toxin. We have seen this situation play out many times before, and you are watching it play out now with wireless radiation. I implore the Berkshire Eagle to learn the facts about this issue so it can support the efforts of the Board of Health. So that's the letter to the editor that never got published. In closing, I'd like to mention that many of us in New Hampshire are not simply cheering you from the sidelines. We are currently working on legislation, that's House Bill 1644, that would mandate a 1,640-foot setback for all cell towers. If we can get this legislation voted into law, it will prevent the types of harm that has been experienced by some of your residents over the past 18 months. As you might expect, we are running into huge pushback from the telecommunications industry as we move to push our legislation forward. Like you, we have learned that industry seems to have limitless resources, and they don't appear to be willing to consider the well-being of the people that if it stands in the way of their profits. While this may seem like a David and Goliath scenario, it's reassuring to recall that sometimes the Davids win. This concludes my comments, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chamberlain. It was such a wonderful response to the Berkshire Eagle piece, and it really touched on every single one of, I think, the things that we are, grappling with in the media. And I'm grateful for you sharing it tonight. And I certainly hope that media here on the call can share portions of that letter. We're very grateful for the journalists who have kept an open mind and have reported. And we've seen other news and media outlets. There was very recently a piece in a men's health magazine on somebody with EHS, and it was fantastic to see mainstream media giving this so much attention. So I really appreciate your time and your care for the work you're doing in New Hampshire and here in the Berkshires. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Courtney.
So our next presenter is Dr. Sharon Goldberg. And she has over 20 years of practicing evidence-based medicine and its applications in chronic illness, particularly through clinical nutrition and environmental modification. Dr. Goldberg is board certified in internal medicine. She has presented widely at the medical conference, particularly dealing with EHS. Those suffering with EHS, like myself and my children, seek her out as she testifies extensively on this issue. So we're really grateful to have our personal physician and a subject matter expert here tonight, sharing with each of you. So thank you, Dr. Goldberg, for being here.
Hi, Courtney. Let me share my screen. Just a second. All right, Courtney, thank you for that introduction. You guys can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, super. So really, I'm here to sort of give you the clinical view of what's going on. My office gets between 3 to 5 calls per month from new patients with EHS, or what I think it's more accurately termed microwave syndrome, which is what they used to call it decades ago. So I'm really familiar with the presentation, diagnosis, and treatment of microwave overexposure. And I can tell you that the symptoms and the presentation of the patients that I've seen from Pittsfield is completely consistent with microwave overexposure. There are ICD-10 codes for this. And as you've already heard, there's robust scientific evidence to support this as a legitimate clinical entity. So the purpose of my little talk today is to refute this statement that Courtney told me Verizon stated, that there's an international and global consensus among, I can't see what it says, but that wireless radiation is safe. That's the purpose of my 3 minutes tonight. So as you've already heard from Dr. Héroux and Dr. Havas, RF toxicity, it's not new. We've known about this for over 5 decades. And I don't know if you can see, but I'm going to hold it up. We've even had entire textbooks written about this subject. This is from 1976, The Biological Effects of Microwaves. So this is a whole textbook, all right, 1976. So it's not new. And now we have even more robust evidence to support this. This is just a snapshot of one of the early military reports that Magda was mentioning. And again, now we have extremely robust evidence to support that this is a bona fide clinical entity. And I know that Dr. Cindy Russell sent your group a presentation about a month ago that goes into all of these effects in detail. So if anybody wants more from the medical side, I suggest that they watch her fantastic presentation. So what I have to say is as of 2022, we've had 2 medical conferences on wireless harms. Both of these conferences have been CME accredited, and that stands for continuing medical education for all of the non-medical people out there. Many of the other experts here on the call, including Magda and Paul, were involved in this conference as well. So CME accreditation, it's a structured and regulated process. So in other words, you can't just get up one day and decide to throw together a medical conference. All the material that gets presented is fact checked, and it has to be reviewed and approved by a third-party accreditation company. So my point is that the conference, this is all legitimate information. Verizon says that radiation is not harmful. Well, we have two separate realities here. So either there are conferences where physicians are learning about the harms of wireless radiation, or there are no harms from wireless radiation. So I think you get the point that there are harms and it's real, it's not made up. And this is just an example of what a CME certificate looks like. Continuing medical education is something that physicians need to do to renew their licenses. So whether you get your credits learning about cirrhosis or you learn about the health effects of electromagnetic fields, these are the same credits that doctors need to renew licenses. Okay, so this is real. This is just a snapshot from the EMF Medical Conference from 2021. And just a few brief slides. You know, we can see cognitive impairment from living near cell towers. Cardiovascular disease is a concern. And as Magda was mentioning, oxidative stress is a key mechanism of harm from cell towers and wireless radiation. And radio frequency radiation, so the emissions of the cell tower, is proven to cause oxidative stress. So what does this mean in English? Oxidative stress is extremely relevant to medicine, and it's now thought to contribute to all of our inflammatory, i.e. chronic diseases. So my takeaway message here is that this is not just about EHS. It's not about people becoming hypersensitive to radiation. The message here is that cell tower radiation makes sick people even sicker when they live under a tower. And you can see from this iceberg slide that, like all these conditions and many, many more, anything that is exacerbated by excessive oxidative stress is going to be exacerbated by 24/7 exposure to a cell tower. So, I'm sorry, this is a slide that I should have hid. So in sum, any claims that have been made as to the safety of cell tower radiation by the wireless industry are false. They're not evidence-based, and they're completely disconnected from reality as of 2022. And I recommend that if you hear anyone making these claims, you should send them to the EMF 2021 Medical Conference website, and they can still register to take the course and even get CME. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goldberg, for your presentation and for supporting the residents here in Pittsfield, supporting my family. This was not something that we had known about before this happened, and it was not even something that we wanted to think about, or to think that technology that we love, as so many people have said, like we love our phones, we love our technology, and now we live in a hardwired house and we still use it all the time. We just use it safely. And with a $6 Ethernet adapter, and just making sure we've got wired connections, we can do that successfully in every room and stay healthy and not have the girls sleeping with vomiting buckets next to their beds anymore. And there wasn't a time, there was a time when we were working together where I just didn't think that we'd ever get better, but truly it has helped me to recognize that this is an environmentally induced illness and that it could have been completely prevented from not having that exposure. So, I want to thank you for everything that you've done for us and here in Pittsfield. And our next presenter is Executive Director of Environmental Health Trust, Theodora Scarato. This is a leading think tank that promotes a healthier environment through research, education, and policy. EHT works with scientists, policymakers, teachers, parents, students to promote awareness of best practices of the safer use of technology. Director Scarato has presented at the Community Development Board hearings on safer cell tower siting and cell tower setbacks here in Pittsfield, also to the Board of Health, and has been a resource for our Pittsfield Health Department on this issue. I want to thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you so much. So let me share my screen. Great. So when I first learned about this a decade ago, I thought for sure that the limits that we had would at least be somewhat safe. I had no idea that there was such a lack of accountability at the federal level. So I'm thankful for all the presentations that have come before that can set me up for what I'm going to talk about, which is our lawsuit against the FCC, where we challenged the FCC's determination that they didn't have to do a full review and update these limits, which were set in 1996, and as has been presented, are based on science from much, much earlier. So they don't protect against biological effects, children's vulnerability. I mean, we didn't even have the science at the time when they decided that heat was the only harm. So to start and to hop right in on what everyone has said, in 2019, the Federal Communications Commission, that's the entity in the United States that has authority regarding regulations on cell tower, cell phone, Wi-Fi, and so forth, radiation. They made a decision not to update their limits. And there had been thousands of pages of scientific evidence, expert evidence, organizations filing recommendations that the FCC do launch a full review. However, the FCC decided that they didn't need to do a review, and we filed. The court decision was issued in 2021 in August. The determination was that the FCC had ignored evidence of long-term exposure, of children's vulnerability, the testimony of people who'd been injured, like the families in Pittsfield, and there were over 200 testimonies related to that, impacts to the developing brain and reproductive system, and there was also a complete failure to address environmental impacts. And you can go online to Environmental Health Trust and learn all about the lawsuit and all about all of these other issues. But I wanted to focus on the Berkshire Eagle piece, because I too, there's this line in there that said, don't take it from us about how there's no evidence, take it from the National Cancer Institute, the World Health Organization, the EPA, and the National Toxicology Program, not to mention independent research. And I would have been right there thinking, well, of course, you go to the National Cancer Institute page and it seems like there's no problem. It doesn't say in a big, bold statement, hey, we haven't looked at this issue, but let me share with you a few things that I wish I had known and that I would love for everyone who's watching this to know. So let's start with the National Cancer Institute. The National Cancer Institute has not done any systematic review or evaluation on the issue of cell tower, cell phone, radiation at all. So this is confirmed in several ways, of which I'm going to share. Denise Ricciardi, who was on the call earlier, had written a letter to the National Cancer Institute. And in the New Hampshire State 5G State Commission, you can go in and see the email communications between the New Hampshire Commission and the National Cancer Institute, in which they confirmed, when she asked, what is the National Cancer Institute's opinion on the safety of 5G, 4G, and cell towers, that as a federal research agency, the National Cancer Institute is not involved in the regulation of radio frequency telecommunications infrastructure and devices, nor do we make recommendations for policies related to this technology. Our sister agencies, the FDA, as well as the FCC, retain responsibility for reviewing guidance on safety concerns and informing the public if these circumstances change. Now, I had written the National Cancer Institute earlier because my local school board had told me the same thing. They said, well, the National Cancer Institute says it's safe. They say it right on their website. And I have documentation and letters where they communicate to me that neither the literature reviews nor the fact sheets make safety determinations. So as I'm going to be talking about, there has been no review of all of the research by any federal agency with expertise in health and environment. So let's look at also the World Health Organization. The link goes to the EMF project site. Now, I don't have time to go into it, but there's actually two entities at the World Health Organization. It's under the umbrella of the WHO, but there are two separate entities. One entity is the EMF project. They have not done any reports, research reviews, or determinations since 1993. The Berkshire Eagle opinion piece goes to this page on 5G. And if you actually look at it and click on it and go to what is the WHO doing, they talk about how they are doing a review that should be published in 2022. And if you continue to say, well, oh, they're doing a review. Well, when did they last do a review? It's actually 1993 that the World Health Organization EMF project last did a health risk assessment. Now, there's all kinds of issues around conflicts of interest that I can't go into that have to do with this particular entity at the WHO. But remember that the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is under the WHO, did classify radiofrequency radiation as possibly carcinogenic to humans in 2011. And since then, numerous experts who actually served on the WHO, International Agency for Research on Cancer, working group, the scientists that got together to make that determination, have determined that the science is robust enough to determine that radiofrequency radiation is at least now a probable, if not a proven carcinogen. Dr. Christopher Portier, who's the retired director of the United States Center for Environmental Health at the CDC, who served as an expert to the WHO and also retired director of the agency, U.S. Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. He filed a report in a lawsuit with actually there's several people who have brain tumors they're alleging are from the cell phones. And in this report, he states that the science is enough to determine that the probability is high. There's also Dr. Leonard Hardell, who has published many papers concluding that radiofrequency radiation is a human carcinogen. So what of the EPA? Well, the EPA did have a robust review research program that they were doing for many years. In fact, what I'm showing you is slides from a presentation that they did to the FCC. They were developing safety limits for radiofrequency radiation, and they would be based on health effects, and they were fully defunded from doing that. When the Telecom Act was passed in 1996, one of the most heavily lobbied bills in the United States ever, I think it's actually ever, certainly at the time. And they were fully defunded, and the FCC, as discussed, took on the limits from industry groups. Now, when you go to the EPA, it's actually all goes to the FCC. All the web pages were scrubbed, updated. They don't have any report that the EPA itself has done, but instead simply parroting FCC language. Then we go to a letter that the EPA wrote me, because I wrote the EPA and I asked them, what is your stance? Have you made a determination? Because everyone seems to think you have. And I actually got a letter from attorney Leanne B. Veal. She's the director of the Radiation Protection Division of the Office of Radiation and Indoor Air at the EPA. And she said, the EPA's last review was in 1984, and we don't have a mandate for radiofrequency matters. And she answered all of my questions, basically saying, we haven't reviewed it, but we've made no determination. So what of the National Toxicology Program that was cited in the Berkshire Eagle? Well, they looked at this issue with a $30 million animal study, and they were asked by the FDA to do that because there was inadequate research on long-term exposure, and they were asked decades ago. They finally came out with their findings, which were that there is clear evidence of tumors in the hearts of male rats, some in the brains of male rats. There was damage to the heart, and there was also DNA damage in tissues of the mice and the rats. This is a quote from Dr. Linda Birnbaum, who filed a statement in one of the amicus briefs. And she said, overall, those National Toxicology Program findings demonstrate the potential for radiofrequency radiation to cause cancer in animals. And also, I don't have time to present all of this, but Dr. Ronald Melnick, who led the design of the National Toxicology Program study, also has published numerous papers and given many presentations. You can go online to watch those, talking about how the study is important. It shows that there are non-thermal effects, and there needs to be reductions of exposure to protect the public. And this is Dr. Leonard Hardell. I don't have any time, so I'm just going to finish up and say the FDA, that many people say, well, okay, not the National Toxicology Program, not the EPA, not the WHO, but the FDA, they say it's safe. Well, the FDA recently wrote a mother in California who wrote the FDA asking, I got this cell tower in front of my home. Is this safe? Show me where you determined it was safe. And I should add that the FCC, actually, we have a record of a lawyer writing back to this mother saying, the FDA says it's safe. The WHO says it's safe. Then when asked, well, where are the reports? He couldn't find them. So then she wrote the FDA, who in the response said, the FDA does not regulate cell towers or cell tower radiation. Therefore, the FDA has no studies or information on cell towers to provide in response to your questions. And I would also just end with this University of Pittsburgh Law Review, which came out last year. It's entitled, "The FCC Keeps Letting Me Be, Why Radiofrequency Radiation Standards Have Failed to Keep Up with Technology." And this is a discussion of the policy and the failure of these federal agencies to create safe guidelines that protect the public. And this wasn't mentioned, so I had to mention the captured agency, because this sort of ties all the pieces together. I mean, how did this happen? I know I asked myself, well, wait a minute, we're all using cell phones, there's cell towers everywhere. There's, in my community, we're getting towers 30 feet from homes with no say, no notice, no nothing. This is happening across the country. And this Harvard report from 2015 documents how the wireless industry is using the tactics of big tobacco. Not only are they involved in the science, but there is millions of dollars into Congress. The FCC is captured. We have former industry leadership who is at the leadership of the FCC and actually paved the way for the situation we're in now. So I recommend that because they explain how we sort of got to where we are. And in conclusion, there's been no systematic review of the totality of evidence by any U.S. health or safety agency. That's in the court documents in our case. And also, if you listen to the hearing in court, you can hear an inquiry where one of the judges is saying, well, wait, how do you know that long-term exposure is safe? Where is it? Where's the document? Where's the report? And there was nothing that the FCC could provide except to say that they made that determination, but there was no report, review of all of the science. So I won't read the quote, but you can go to Environmental Health Trust to learn more. And I thank you so much. I'm glad to answer any questions afterwards.
Thank you so much.
Just to conclude that there is, I've said it a million times, but there is a complete lack of accountability at the federal level.
And I really appreciate you talking us through that, because I think any member of the public who just reads it and says, oh, I did a quick Google search and, it told me that it was safe. The work that you have done is to dive deeper into that and say, but who says, and where's the science, and where's the funding, and when was there a comprehensive review of this? And, we found the same thing when we called the Massachusetts Department of Public Health very early on in the piece, when we had asked the health department to come out to the neighborhood and to meet the neighbors and to discuss all the symptoms. And we weren't getting a response. So we escalated it up and we said, who's looking at cell tower safety? And they said, no one. No one is. Absolutely no one. I mean, and somebody has to be responsible and accountable for the health of people who are sick and suffering and displaced. And thank goodness for our Board of Health doing that work. And I really appreciate that. And I have a lot of those links, but I will put them, I'll put them together in a document. Maybe you can help so we can make sure that the media on this call tonight has all of those resources at their fingertips, as well as our city councilors and our Board of Health members and our neighbors and public here tonight. So thank you. So our next presenter, we have Attorney Robert Berg.
Good evening.
I'm really appreciative for you, Robert, for being on the call tonight. Attorney Berg has been practicing law for 38 years. He's a litigator. He represents consumers and shareholders in major class action lawsuits against large corporations. And over the past several years, he's been active in representing individuals in groups dealing with the deployment of cell towers in residential neighborhoods. Attorney Berg also educates municipalities and boards about their power to prevent improper siting through strengthened protective wireless zoning bylaws, which we hope you will do here in Pittsfield for us and for Lenox and all of Berkshire County. And we really appreciate your presentation and being able to ask some questions and clear up some misinformation tonight. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm an attorney licensed to practice in New York and New Jersey and numerous federal courts nationwide. I'm not admitted to practice in Massachusetts, however. I have not been retained by any party in connection with Verizon's 877 South Street cell tower in Pittsfield. And as you heard, I represent clients across the country in lawsuits and before land use boards and local governments. And I try to make sure that cell towers and wireless facilities are deployed safely in locations where they don't injure residents. That means keeping them out of residential neighborhoods, so we don't have repeats of the sad situation that the Shacktown residents are experiencing today. My comments tonight don't constitute legal advice to anyone. A month ago, the City of Pittsfield Board of Health courageously voted to issue a cease and desist order to Verizon, requiring Verizon to immediately cease operation of the 877 South Street Tower based on the documented negative health effects on numerous Shacktown residents who live in the immediate vicinity of the Verizon cell tower. Last week, the Board of Health again voted to proceed with the cease and desist order and approved the language of a draft order. The Board of Health has repeatedly invited Verizon to meet and discuss moving the tower to a safer location so that the health of the Shacktown neighborhood can be protected. Verizon has basically told the city and the Board of Health to pound sand and has threatened to go to court if the cease and desist order is issued. The time for action has come. The Board of Health needs to do what it has voted twice in the past month to do, issue the cease and desist order. Verizon will respond, and the Board of Health is on very solid legal ground and has established a very strong factual record to support its decision. Importantly, the Board of Health decision is deemed to be prima facie valid by any court. Verizon has the burden of proving otherwise, and it will face a tough burden because the Board of Health conducted a very lengthy investigation. It reviewed at least 17 residents' complaints of injury and medical records. It researched the medical literature and the scientific literature. It spoke with medical and scientific experts and received medical expert opinions establishing to a reasonable degree of medical certainty that at least 3 residents' injuries were directly caused by wireless radiation transmitted from this specific Verizon tower. So that's a tremendous factual record that the Board of Health is relying upon to come to the conclusion that it needs to protect public safety and public health by issuing the cease and desist order. And Verizon has to disprove that. They have the burden of proof here. So I've heard that people on the city council and otherwise are concerned that, oh, this is a very challenging case and we're going to be exposed here to tremendous liability and we have the burden of proof. It's not true. The Verizon will have the burden of proof here. Also, the exposure to the city is the legal fees, and the city may well have liability insurance that can provide legal counsel. I don't know if the city does have a policy, but most municipalities do have insurance if they are in fact sued by a company like Verizon. I know in my town in Scarsdale, New York, they have a liability policy, and if there's a lawsuit against the town, the policy kicks in after a relatively minimal deductible and pays for the defense costs. There are no monetary damages that Verizon can recover here. If the tower is shut down and Verizon somehow prevails eventually, the tower gets turned back on. I mean, there's no monetary damages that Verizon can get if the decision somehow is overturned. So the board really has to act here, and the board has the power to do so under Massachusetts law. The Board of Health has the power and the duty to protect the health, safety, and welfare of its residents. And based on the record here today, the record is clear. It needs to act. I will be happy to answer questions after I finish, but that's really all I have to say. It's time for the order to be issued. There's really no more time to delay. The residents are suffering every day. They're displaced from their homes. They're suffering physical injuries and emotional trauma from this, and they deserve to get back into their houses. So I would ask the Board of Health really to, in 2 days, to issue this cease and desist, and hopefully the City Council will provide the funding to hire outside counsel to represent the Board of Health, because I understand that the city solicitor does not have the expertise to really represent the Board of Health in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it, because I think that's the piece. The legal piece is the piece where we got a lot of questions tonight, because for a long time, you know, our city councilors, and it was reported in the paper that nothing could be done. Nothing could be done to help these residents because there was an abutter notification litigation that, you know, myself and many of the people harmed are actually not a part of. Some people do overlap, but there was nothing that could be done until the judge ruled on that, because there was no power because of this thing called preemption. And I'm aware that we also have attorney Scott McCollough on the phone call tonight. And I was wondering if, you know, you answered many of the questions that people asked, you know, which was, you know, will the city of Pittsfield be liable for monetary damages to Verizon when the Board of Health issues the cease and desist? And you've answered that by no, you know, there's no, it's not going to be liable for monetary damages. We'll get to preemption in a minute, but one of the questions that somebody submitted was, it was reported in Inside Towers magazine, which is a wireless publication and industry influencer, that without a legal order, that Verizon would not come to the table to discuss moving the tower. And that once the order is issued, you know, that discussion could take place. Is there hope that Verizon will be a good corporate neighbor and, or even 877 South Street, the landowners, and perhaps move the tower to a safer location or one of the 4 locations that were provided by the community?
In my experience, Verizon is never a good corporate neighbor. I meet up with Verizon all across the country, and they're among the worst corporate citizens I've ever seen. They just do not care about people. They just want to put up these towers where they want, and they just don't care and are unwilling. So they've told the city already, we're not moving the tower. They've told them repeatedly. They've come in, as I understand it, several times to talk about, with the Board of Health in particular, talk about possibly moving it, and they've said no. And I understand there are sites available where landowners are willing to host the towers, and Verizon says we're not moving it. So I wouldn't put much hope in that. And at this point, I don't see that the Board of Health has any other course of action other than to issue the cease and desist and see what happens.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Scott McCollough, here is Attorney McCollough. I just want to make an introduction for folks who don't know you. For people who do know you, you are a principal at McCollough Law Firm in Austin, Texas, and that you offered oral arguments before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit case against the FCC. And you were part of that August 13th, 2021 decision that found that the FCC failed to provide a reasoned explanation for its determination about those current guidelines. I'd love for you to also weigh in on this. Thank you for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you. I too need to precede in my initial statements with kind of explanation. Yes, I did have the privilege of arguing on behalf of all the petitioners in the FCC case. EHT was among them, Children's Health Defense, some other organizations, and several really wonderful individuals. It was an extraordinary experience. And indeed, it was my first time getting acquainted with all of these wireless issues. I'm kind of the newcomer here. I've been doing wireless harms now for a little over 2 years. To be frank, I was on the other side of this until then, but now I'm a convert. In terms of the folks in the city of Pittsfield, I am representing some of the residents there. And so everybody needs to understand that when I speak tonight, it is as an advocate of some of the citizens. So understand my role. I'm not going to go back and repeat what Robert Berg said. He's right in everything he said. The only follow-up point I want to make is in the draft order that the board has said it would issue when it can. The first part of the order in the ordering paragraphs is Verizon, we give you 7 days to request a hearing. And if you do not request a hearing within 7 days, then the cease and desist takes effect. And so the main driver of that order is to, in fact, give Verizon every possible incentive to come and appear for the first time and deal with this in good faith. The goal of the citizens here is simple. We just want to be able to go home. And there are any number of things that could be done to resolve this situation. I'm not going to get into the specifics because ultimately it may come down to negotiations. But, you know, if Verizon just does what it needs to do under the order, and that's request a hearing, we can have a hearing. It can lay out its principles. We could go through some kind of negotiation. And this might well be resolved. So I would invite Verizon, because I know they're monitoring this. I would invite you to show up for the first time and let's try to talk this out. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. One of the questions that I was asked again from a city councilor was, where's the burden of proof? And maybe you could answer that, or Scott could answer, you know, the burden. I think it was already mentioned, but I mean, clearly we've got doctors, we've got medical experts who have been doing this work. But Scott, do you want to weigh in?
Sure. And actually, I'm just going to point back to what Robert Berg said. This is an administrative law question. The board will have issued its order. Verizon will have to sue to overturn it, and will have to show that there is not substantial evidence to support the board's order. And substantial evidence in the law means more than just a little. And I can assure you there's more than just a little in the record of this case. So they're going to have an extraordinarily hard time under the so-called substantial evidence test. What this is going to come down to is this notion of preemption. And, you know, we can discuss that topic. We haven't really talked about it much tonight. I know Robert has his take on it, and I agree with that very much as well. But, you know, just in terms of what it would take for Verizon to overturn it, having tried to appeal agency orders many, many times in my 40-year career, let me tell you, it's no easy task. We managed to do that in the FCC case. I recently lost an FCC case. And so, you know, good luck to Verizon if they sue to challenge this. It's going to come down to preemption. Since Verizon has chosen to not engage, you know, we have to just be as obstinate as they are. But the entire goal here is to sit down and have what we call a negotiation. We want to negotiate this. We want to see if there's some way that can accomplish Verizon's needs while also protecting the health of the folks there in Shacktown.
Thank you. I have one more question, which is, what is the city's obligation, again, from a city councilor submitted it tonight, what is the city's obligation to support the Board of Health in enforcing the order? And what does the city council have to do with this?
I'd like to speak to some of the city councilors. You know, they are the legislators here. And the Board of Health is the city in this context. The Board of Health is acting pursuant to delegations under state law and under the city charter. The Board of Health is under the executive branch of the cities. And, you know, that's the mayor. So when the board issues its order, the mayor will have the duty of seeing to it that that board order is enforced. That's in the city charter too. And really what the city council's role here is seeing to two things. One, it has a legislative capacity to call hearings and ask questions of the mayor and determine facts regarding the finances of the city and indeed even the mayor's intentions to enforce the order. They can do that, and maybe they should. But this is really just truly up to right now the board when it's able to issue this order, and then for the mayor to see to it that that the order is enforced. You know, we all know this is about money, as Robert noted. Oftentimes, and I don't know whether it's the case here, you know, there is insurance that would cover the cost of this litigation. Short of that, then, you know, they're going to have to look to the budget to see if there are contingency funds or some reserves that might be used. I understand, of course, that when the city set up its budget, this was not in the expectations that were in there. And so they're going to have to decide as a city whether they're going to reallocate some resources and what the resources are. And there are other ways to deal with this. But I've got to turn back to the main point here. And this is really about just getting Verizon to, for the first time, engaged. Because there are any number of things that can be done short of having a big, long fight, even in the courts. If they would just show up, talk to the board, meet with the residents, try to reason together, we can probably find a solution to this. And that's what everybody here wants.
That is absolutely what everyone here wants. Thank you for that. I've got another question in the chat. And it's a two-parter. One is, under the counselor's oath of office, what do they legally, ethically, morally have to do? And the second part is, what about the Massachusetts Tort Law Claims Act that protects boards of health from personal liability if they're acting in good faith?
Is this for me?
It sure is.
You know, the city councilors do take an oath of office. But, you know, I've got to say this again, this really isn't directly under their purview. This is on the executive side of the question. And the mayor had to take an oath of office to see to it that the law is faithfully executed. Once that board issues its order, that's a board order, and it will be the mayor's duty to enforce that board order. The council can, of course, communicate to the mayor, and we hope that it does, that they are fully behind this effort, and they will work cooperatively in their legislative capacity to, you know, help the mayor make decisions, and they can express resolutions in support. If there is potentially, and I don't think it's necessarily the case, but if there is potentially some budget amendments that need to be taken, then the city council can help do that too. I would point out that, you know, you're almost 8 months into your fiscal year. And so there may be money there that could be allocated, at least initially. The mayor has yet to present his 60-day anticipated revenues and expenses to the council. The mayor has yet to, I said his, I apologize, her, to submit the proposed budget, which is due 30 days before the council adopts its budget order. And so the council could also encourage the mayor and the city financial folks to put money in the budget for this for the next fiscal year. There's any number of ways to deal with this. But, you know, we're all anticipating that Verizon is going to carry out its threat to sue. You know, I used to represent the industry and I did administrative law for them. And I will tell you, if I was confronted with the board with an order like this one, I would be telling them, you must request a hearing. You're an idiot if you don't request a hearing. If you waive the hearing and just let this cease and desist go into effect, you're going to give up a lot of rights. Verizon has every incentive to show up and for the first time negotiate. They really need to do this.
The city council has the Board of Health is not allowed to hire outside counsel for itself. So that would have to go through the city council. They're the only group that actually can fund the hiring of outside counsel to the extent it's necessary and to the extent there's no insurance coverage for the Board of Health. So that would be one of the main duties of the city council in this, would be to stand behind the Board of Health and fund any necessary expenditures for outside counsel. And that's under Massachusetts law, does not allow the Board of Health or any municipal agency within the city to go out and hire counsel on its own.
The first comes from the mayor. The mayor is the one who is responsible for organizing that effort and to make proposals. And to the extent any budget amendments or adjustments are necessary, then yes, the council gets to vote.
I just, before closing remarks, I just want to ask if either Dr. Goldberg or Dr. Héroux or Dr. Chamberlain, Dr. Havas has any comments that they, you know, would like to make in closing, you know, either about Pittsfield or, you know, how we got to this point or moving forward, what to do.
Oh, I was just going to say, I wish you all the best. You're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, and sometimes doing that is challenging. So good luck. I hope that all the right decisions are made. And I hope that there's some relief for the people of Pittsfield who are suffering from the tower.
Thank you, Dr. Chamberlain.
Courtney, thank you very much for not looking the other way and tackling this problem. We're indebted, all of us, to you.
I thought you were saying that to Miss Orsi, because, you know, really as, you know.
No.
I mean, as a mouse scampered, you know, Robert knows I'm living in this little 100-year-old, you know, cottage, and we'd really like to be back home in a warm house. And, you know, sometimes I send emails at 2 o'clock in the morning because that's what time, you know, the girls are done and we're done with after school, and, you know, I can sit and focus, and I'd rather be getting my sleep. But there was a mouse that just like ran across the counter, and I was like, yeah, this is why we fight. Yep. You know, because if I was like in a really comfortable resort, you know, it might be a little bit different, but we, you know, we fight to go home and bring awareness to this, because nobody should be displaced. Nobody should have their kids vomiting in buckets in their own bedrooms, or wake up with headaches or dizziness, and have straight A kids who end up having to miss school as a, you know, result of this. It's devastating as a parent to watch this and to experience it. You know, we really need to be working on these bigger levels to create these protections. And I just, in closing, I have this Pittsfield Board of Health letter, and I'll make sure that people have a copy of it, because I'm not sure if people know that Dr. Goldberg, before he left the Board of Health, wrote a really powerful an important letter to support the Joint Commission on Consumer Protection for Senate Bill 186 to form a special commission to research the impact of electromagnetic and radio frequency radiation on consumer protection, public health, and technology in the Commonwealth. Now, if you've been following our story, you know that Dr. Goldberg in the very beginning, I'm not sure he believed us. You know, many of you, I know, you know, Paul, Sharon, Cindy Russell was like literally in surgery, and she was calling into Board of Health open comments, and we had 18 folks on the line, and they're like, yeah, we're not going to let anyone speak. And, you know, like those are just anti-cell tower people who don't have anything to add to the conversation. That was a real turning point, because we were like, we're trying to offer you experts because this is a really hard issue. And these are doctors and professionals, and these are people on the line, neighbors who have been harmed by the wireless radiation. Everybody has something to contribute to this conversation. But I think, the wireless industry, was like, no, this can't be happening. It's like a fear of new technology. They were like saying all these lines. And here he was a pediatrician, and we were like, our own pediatricians were not surprised when we told the girls, because they pulled up the American Academy of Pediatric Physician statement that said that there's harm and we need to re-examine these wireless standards. And this letter dated August 31st, 2021, really goes through this journey of, talking to the neighbors here and talking to each of you as experts. It mentions Dr. David Carpenter, who's not here tonight, and Dr. Cindy Russell, and really saying that wireless radiation causes oxidative stress at low levels of radiation, and these low levels cause a slow decline in the physiologic processes. And for those who have become sensitive, it creates an immediate reaction. And people vary in their vulnerability due to age, genetics, and other toxic exposures. And not all people react similarly, which explains why some people have issues and other people don't. And some people have a longer duration of exposure than other people do. This letter really speaks, not only to that Berkshire Eagle editorial, but to the whole process that the Health Department and the Board of Health has thoughtfully and with their due diligence has gone through. And Dr. Goldberg ends his statement with, Massachusetts cannot wait for the FCC to act. We are asking for your strong support of this bill and for a favorable report out of the Committee on Consumer Protections. And I believe that that is what Dr. Goldberg, advocated and wanted. And this is what we're seeing now in the legacy of, Miss Bobby Orsi, who is now our new chair. And just want to thank each and every single one of you for being on this call and for engaging in these conversations and for protecting our health. Thank you. So with that, I will say thank you for being with us for our nearly 2 hours. I will send a follow-up email with many of the links that were provided, and Dr. Paul Peru has provided slides, etc. We'll make sure that those things get distributed to folks. I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for your time and for your care this evening. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Scott McCollough for being here and Robert Berg for being here. And Robert, I want to thank you on behalf of Pittsfield for looking at those wireless zoning bylaws. I know that piecemeal, we have been looking at making changes to each and every one, but we have been advised to perhaps look at them as a whole. And Robert has offered his expertise in that way. And Scott, thank you for your expertise as well with the cease and desist, and all of the doctors and physicians and subject matter experts. Thank you so much for being here. Pam and Andy, thank you for being technical and doing this for us tonight. Have a good night, everyone.